Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet.
Hi, I'm Mike from 1AAuto. I hope this how-to video helps you out. And next time you need parts for your vehicle, think of 1AAuto.com. Thanks.
In this video, we're going to replace a upper control arm and ball joint assembly on this 2011 Chevy Silverado. This is a 1500 four-wheel drive. This procedure is the same for any 2007 to 2013 Silverado and Sierra 1500. The passenger side is basically the same as the driver's side. And you'll need a new control arm from 1AAuto.com, jack and jack stands, 10 to 22 millimeter sockets with a ratchet and extension, an 18 millimeter wrench and an additional wrench for some extra leverage, breaker bar or pipe for extra leverage, penetrating oil, hammer, pry bar, and torque wrench. From the top, there are three 18 millimeter nuts that hold the top of the strut in place. You can see one there. One has a wire loom on it there that I'm going to reach down and grab and just pull off. Apologies for the camera shot, but you just grab the wire clip and pull it up off the stud. Okay, so you have your other one there and your third one there. Now use an 18 millimeter socket with a long extension and remove those three nuts. Remove the center cap just by prying with a screwdriver, and if you don't have the benefit of air tools, loosen the lug nuts with the vehicle on the ground, then raise and secure the vehicle, and then remove the lug nuts the rest of the way. Remove the wheel and tire, and they are 22 millimeter lug nuts. And turn the wheel using hands or use the steering wheel, and then you need to remove the stabilizer link. Make sure you put some penetrating oil on the top end of it there. Then use a wrench on the top side and a socket wrench on the bottom side and remove it all the way. Going to kind of speed up a little bit. We quote-unquote cheat a little bit just using a impact wrench to take that off. Just speeds things up for us. And then we'll remove the bolt the rest of the way, push down on the suspension, and pull the link out of there. Up underneath there are two 15 millimeter bolts. Hold the bottom of the shock strut in place. And we're just using a 15 millimeter socket and ratchet. You might want to use a breaker bar to break them loose, but they come apart pretty easy on this truck. And we'll fast forward as we just take those out. Those bolts out, press down on the suspension some, and bring the strut down and then up and out. Now with some penetrating oil, spray down the ends of the two bolts that hold the control arm to the frame. Okay, there are little tabs that come out of the frame and go through these washers, and I'm using a paint marker to mark on the washers where those tabs are so that when we reassemble this, we can give it a good preliminary alignment. You will want to realign your truck after you do this repair, but this at least gets it somewhere close to where it was originally. An 18 millimeter nut holds the upper ball joint to the steering knuckle. Put an 18 millimeter wrench on there and then hook another wrench onto it for extra leverage. Loosen it up. Here you can see we still have the nut on the ball joint. We're going to put a big pry bar in there, pry between the steering knuckle and the ball joint, and hit the steering knuckle with a hammer until it pops apart. There's a 10 millimeter bolt on top of the control arm that holds the clip that holds the wiring harness. Remove that. Now we're going to support the suspension with a jack. Remove the nuts that are on the end of the bolts that go into the frame. It's a 21mm socket with a ratchet, and we use a pipe for some extra leverage to get the bolts going. And then once we have them going, they come off easier just with the ratchet. And I'll fast forward as we finish that up and do the other side. And as you can see here, use a hammer to start driving those bolts out, and then you can work them out by hand. You may have to use a punch and drive them further through. And remove the nut the rest of the way off of the top ball joint there, and then you should be able to pull the control arm up and then pull it out. Might need to use a crowbar or a large screwdriver to help pry it out. The ball joint in our new control arm comes with a greasable fitting, so we'll install that. Put the new control arm up in place, and you just kind of wiggle it up and down, I guess, to get the bolts to line up preliminarily with the frame. Now put the bolts back in. Get one bolt started in as much as you can, and then actually if you start the other bolt in on the other side, this kind of lines things up. You should be able to get that bolt most of the way in. Use a hammer to tap it in if you need to, and then go back. And again, if you just move the control arm around a little bit, you should be able to push it in. Okay, just going to fast forward as we start the nuts on. And now we're putting a wrench on the bolt end, and you can see we just pull it up and realign that mark with the tab on the frame, and just preliminarily tighten the nuts up just to hold it in place well. Okay, here we're just going to let the jack down some, just relieves a little pressure so that we can then lift the upper control arm up and get the ball joint lined up and then back into place. And then once it's all set, we'll actually jack the suspension back up till it's basically in the position it should be when the vehicle is riding on the ground. You put the ball joint nut on and start tightening it. Most likely it's going to start making the stud on the ball joint spin, and if that happens, you'll see here in a second, you can put a 6mm Allen wrench into the ball joint stud and hold it. You do need to be careful. Sometimes as you pull the ball joint stud through, it can interfere with the axle, and you might need to undo the axle nut and push the axle through a little bit in order to get the wrench back out. And make sure you put the wrench on there and put the second wrench on for some extra leverage and tighten that nut right up. Now again, we have the suspension up in about the same position it's going to be when it rides on the ground. You want to make sure you have it up there, and then torque the bolts for the control arm to 100 foot-pounds. And just make sure that the marks on your washers and everything still line up. Now you can let your jack back down. Reinstall the 10mm bolt that holds the wiring harness clip. And use a grease gun to put some grease into the ball joint. And we generally do it until we see the boot between the ball joint and the steering knuckle start to expand. Bring the strut back in. If you look on the top of the strut where the coil spring ends, that goes to the outside, and you put the strut back in and then lift it up into place, and then you can just start the nuts on to the top. Install the lower bolts in the strut and tighten them up. You want to tighten them up between 70 and 75 foot-pounds. Okay, speed up as we put the stabilizer link back in place. Use a pry bar to lift up on the sway bar a little bit, put the link back in place, put the bolt up through, and then tighten the nut down on top. And then put our wheel back on, put the lug nuts back on by hand first, then tighten them up preliminarily. And with the vehicle back down on the ground and secure, tighten those torque the lug nuts to 110 foot-pounds using a crossing pattern. Tighten up and torque the top 3 nuts to 75 to 80 foot-pounds and put that wire clip back in place and you should be all set.
We hope this helps you out. Brought to you by www.oneauto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet. Please feel free to call us toll free 888-844-3393. We're the company that's here for you on the internet and in person.